Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. What I wanted to start over the next week or two is a cumulative review of everything we've talked about this year. We've talked about so many different topics and have learned so many different things. But when it comes to the state test, there are a few key things that you want to make sure that you're really refreshed on. And so that's what we're going to be doing over the next couple days. I'm going to show you what types of questions you might get on the test, what topics they fall under, and then we'll go through and make sure that we hit all those high points. And that way, when you get to the test day, you're refreshed and it's not like you haven't talked about this stuff in a couple months. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and try to get started. These are the standards that I'm going to look at today. This might not mean anything to you, but your teacher knows what this means, okay? What we're looking at right here, this is the framework for the biology state test. There's a lot of information here. You can see at the bottom it tells you how many questions there are and how long you have. The biology state test has a total of 65 questions. You have 3 hours to take the test. In my experience, that is more than enough time. So when you get to the state test at the end of the year, please don't feel rushed or panicked. You're going to have plenty of time. And odds are you're going to be waiting around while you're waiting on everybody else to finish. So take your time, read the questions carefully, and make sure to go back and double check your work. Okay? What I really wanted to draw your attention to is how much of the tasks are broken into these different categories. Up here at the top, you can see that anywhere from 27 to 50% of the task is made up of questions from cells and energy. So cell biology is incredibly important when it comes to the state test. You're going to get a lot of questions about it. So we're going to make sure to talk about that as we're going over these lessons over the next couple days. After that, the next set of questions that you'll mostly get are about heredity and evolution. So this is like all the stuff about Punnett squares and genetics, as well as Darwin and his theories of natural selection and evolution. This can be up from about a quarter to about a third of the task can be on these topics. And then lastly, the interdependence of organisms and their environment. That's the ecology that we were just talking about. That makes up anywhere from 13 to 17% of the test. So when I'm reviewing these with my class, I really focus on this stuff up here because that's what you're mostly going to get questions on. That's what you want to make sure you're refreshed on. If you're going back and trying to study a little bit on your own, please make sure you refer to this so that you're really using your time wisely, right? You would be well off to really focus on this information up here because that could make up about half of the test. So that's what we're going to get started with today, and I hope that's helpful as you move forward and are studying for this on your own time. So here are some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what does it mean to be alive? We're going to talk about a couple of different scientists that help contribute to the cell theory. We're going to talk about levels of organization. And lastly, we're going to discuss viruses and whether or not scientists think they're alive or not. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about some of that stuff. So first of all, I wanted to talk about life. This is a biology class, and we know that biology means the study of life. So one of the first things we need to be able to do is try to define life. Well, that is actually a very, very hard thing to do. Defining life is challenging because it is a process and not a substance. There are over 123 definitions of life. So people really have a lot of different ideas of what it means to be alive. Most of those definitions include reproduction and variation. So those are two very important things when it comes to life. When it comes to talking about life, it's better to describe what it is like rather than to say what it is because it's very hard to define. So how can we describe life? Here are some things that all living things share. For scientists, this is a good checklist. If something can meet all of these different characteristics of life, it's probably a living thing. If it's missing a couple of them, scientists would not consider that thing as being alive. So let's look at some of these different characteristics of life. First of all, we have homeostasis. Homeostasis is the maintenance of a stable internal environment. You are doing this all day. Your body is changing and reacting to your external environment. If it starts to get really cold outside, you're going to start to shiver and shake to try to get your body heat up. If you start to get really hot, your body's going to start to sweat to cool you off. That helps to maintain your homeostasis. Next up, a characteristic of life that a lot of things have is organization. Living things are made up of cells, which are organized into higher levels the more complex life becomes. And we're going to look at some of those different levels of organization here later in this lesson. Another thing that all living things do is maintain metabolism, okay? What that is the sum of all the chemical reactions in your body. Living things need energy for homeostasis and other activities. We take the food that you eat and the air that you breathe, and through some pretty complicated chemical reactions, we turn it into energy that your body can use. Okay, another characteristic of life is growth. Living things tend to mature and develop as it ages. Okay, living things are also going to adapt. This is the process of becoming better suited to a habitat through evolution. Living things are also going to respond to stimuli, which means that living things react to an external input. Let's say you had a friend and he threw something at your head. You have self-preservation, and so you would try to get out of the way of that thing because you don't want to get hit in the face, right? Another characteristic of life is reproduction. This is the ability to reproduce new individual organisms. So if a thing can match or meet all of these characteristics, scientists would probably consider it as a living thing. So that brings me to my next question. Are viruses considered living or not? This debate to classify viruses as living or not living is still hotly contested today. There is still research being done at this moment to try to answer this question. For the general scientific community, we do not consider viruses as being alive. They simply don't meet most of those characteristics of life that other things have. So here are some examples that viruses would not be considered alive. Viruses are not made up of cells, they do not have metabolism, and they cannot reproduce without a host. But like I was saying, there is new research coming out that challenges this claim. Perhaps we have misunderstood viruses on a basic level. Scientists are still looking into this, and if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to do some research because we're learning more about viruses every single day. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about is the cell theory. There are 3 parts of the cell theory that you need to know about. So number 1, all living things are made up of 1 or more cells. Some organisms are very, very small and are only 1 cell large. We would say that that is a unicellular organism. Bigger organisms like plants and animals, we can be made up of trillions of cells, and so we would say that that is multicellular, okay? Number 2 of the cell theory says cells are the basic unit of structure and function for life. So when it comes to being alive, it doesn't get any smaller than a cell. You can't go smaller than a cell and still find something that is alive. So cells are as small as it goes when it comes to being alive. Lastly, all cells come from pre-existing cells. Okay, so those are the 3 parts of the cell theory. Let's look at some scientists that help contribute to this idea of the cell theory. First of all, we have Robert Hooke. He was the first person to see cells. He was using a microscope and he was examining cork, that's a type of tree, and he saw a lot of little rooms, and it kind of reminded him of cells in a jail or that the monks were living in at the churches, and so he called them cells. So he coined the term cells. Something that I like to tell students is that Robert Hooke took a look, and what did he see? He saw cells. The next person that contributed to the cell theory is Theodore Schwann. He discovered that all animals are made up of cells. To me, this one is a little bit easier to remember. His name is Schwann. He discovered that all animals are made up of cells, and to me, his name sounds a lot like swan, and swan is an animal, and that helps me remember what he did. The next guy is Matthias Schleiden. He discovered that all plants are made up of cells. He was a botanist, and when he heard that the cork was made up of cells, he started to look at a lot of different types of plants. And he discovered that everyone he looked at were all made up of cells, just like that cork was. And so he took Robert Hooke's original idea and expanded it to all plants. Lastly, we have a scientist named Rudolf Virchow, and he had this famous saying, all cells come from cells. And so what this is saying is that life isn't just being made spontaneously. It's not just coming out of nowhere. A living thing comes from something that is already alive. And that played a really important role with our idea of the germ theory and as well as how cells operate. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about today are levels of organization. We talked about this way at the beginning of the year, and I think it's really important to review it right now. So as life becomes more complex, cells organize themselves into more elaborate forms. So looking at that picture down there, I'll kind of walk you through this real quick. So you can see, like I said earlier, cells are the basic unit of structure and function. But as organisms get really, really large, today most humans are made up of trillions of cells. And so these trillions of cells need to be organized in a way that they can work together. Okay? When similar cells come together to form a team and start working together to get a job done, they make something called tissue. Your body has a lot of different type of tissue in it. You can have nervous tissue, you can have bone tissue, you can have muscle tissue. All of those are different types of tissues. Okay? So a tissue is similar cells doing a similar job. When we get different types of tissues working together, for example, we might get some muscle tissue and some skin tissue, and when they start working together, they'll make something called an organ. Looking at this organ, you might know that this is the stomach. Your stomach is made up of multiple different types of tissue. On the inside of this stomach, you have a type of tissue called epithelial tissue. It's kind of like your skin. But the outside of the stomach is actually muscle tissue. Your stomach helps you digest food, and one way it does that is by churning your food. And so the outside of the stomach is a muscle, and it churns your food up like this and helps to break it down. That's why your stomach gurgles when you haven't had anything to eat, because when it's churning that food, it's mostly just, there's nothing in there. And so that's where the sound's coming from. Okay, so next up we have the stomach. This is an organ. You can get a bunch of different organs on a team, and that would make something called an organ system. So your stomach helps you digest food, but it's not the only organ that does that. When your stomach starts to work together with your small and your large intestine and your esophagus and a lot of different organs, all of those organs come together to make something known as the digestive system. And all of those organs are going to help you digest your food. Lastly, when you have a couple different organ systems working together, we'll make an organism. So we might have your digestive system, your cardiovascular system, your nervous system, your urinary system. When they're all coming together to make sure you're working the way you're supposed to, that's called an organism. And an organism is just any one living thing. So a mouse is an organism, your cat, your dog is an organism, you are an organism, a plant is an organism. But our levels of organization actually don't stop there. We can get a little bit more complicated as we move up to the next level. So let's talk about those next. So these are even more levels of organization. As life becomes more complex, even more levels of organization starts to emerge. We'll start at the population level. What is a population? A population is a group of the same species in the same place. So a population, an example of this would be a pride of lions in the desert, right? A pride of lions, so they're all one species and they're all in the same place at the same time. That's a population. The next level of organization is called a community. This is a group of different species in the same area. So now you might be talking about the pride of lions in the desert, but also they might be hunting the antelope. And so those different species are part of a community, right? The next level above community is an ecosystem. In an ecosystem, this is a group of different species and their non-living environment in the same place. So when we're talking about an ecosystem, we might be talking about the pride of lions, the herd of antelope, the water and the rocks that also make up their environment. All of that would be an ecosystem, okay? The next level above ecosystem is a biome. A biome is all the ecosystems that share similar fauna, flora, and climate, which means think about like the tropical rainforest. You have a tropical rainforest in South America, you have a tropical rainforest in Africa, you have a tropical rainforest in the Indonesian island chain. Well, they're separated by vast differences, by vast geographical distances, but they all share similar plants and animals and climate. And so they would all be considered the same biome. They would all be a tropical rainforest. Lastly, the largest level of organization is the biosphere. The biosphere contains all biomes and all forms of life on the planet. It goes from the very deepest trenches in the ocean to the very top part of the mountaintop. Wherever life can be supported on the planet Earth is part of the biosphere. So y'all, thank you so much for making it here today. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.